So welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to start today's session by acknowledging Mother Earth and all of her living creatures upon whom we all depend. And I'd also like to acknowledge and respect tangata whenua and also the traditional owners of the lands from which we are all joining today, including our friends in Australia. Welcome everyone to today's discussion with Kristy Graham, the Chief Executive of the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute, which we refer to as ASFI, well, and I think also ASFI refers to as ASFI. Kristy will provide an introduction to ASFI and the program of work they are advancing in the context of unprecedented government and financial sector leadership for climate, nature and sustainability in Australia. Similar to ASFI, the Centre for Sustainable Finance was developed in 2021 to advance an equitable, inclusive and sustainable financial system in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do this by advancing the Sustainable Finance Forum's 2030 Roadmap for Action, which contains 11 recommendations for changing mindsets, transforming finance and financing transformation. Building capability in our financial institutions, government agencies and regulators, especially through industry associations and formal training pathways, is one of these key recommendations. In the past 2 years, a number of organisations in Aotearoa, New Zealand have stepped up to the challenge the roadmap laid down in this regard. With the advent of mandatory disclosures, INFINS and the IOD, or the Institute of Directors, have developed specialised programming to meet the capability gaps of their members. This builds on the existing work of the Sustainable Business Council, Sustainable Business Network, RIA, and the Aotearoa Circle, as well as others. Through the Stewardship Code, the Centre has been supporting investors to strengthen their stewardship practice. And we also now see a slow emergence of sustainable finance and sustainability offerings through universities. However, this is not nearly sufficient to meet the pace and scale of change flowing through the financial sector globally, or indeed the challenge of mobilising trillions of dollars of capital into the nature positive transition. Recently, both the Centre and ASFI sent representatives to the annual general meeting of a UN-convened network of financial centres for sustainability. Capability was the core focus of this global network, with many countries recognising the crucial importance of talent in their response to changing regulation and attempts to position themselves for flows of green and transition finance. For this reason, we are very pleased to observe the work ASFI is leading in Australia and explore its application for Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our session today will include a presentation from Kristy and then time for questions. So please do put your questions in the chat as they come up. Our objective is for this to be an exploratory discussion and potentially look to open up pathways to greater trans-Tasman alignment over coming months. So with that, I'm very pleased to hand over to you, Kristy. Welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jo. And it's great. We partner with Jo and the Centre on a range of different topics and issues, and it's great to be part of this capability webinar. I think there's a lot that we can, in the work that ASFI is doing, that is applicable to a New Zealand context, and looking forward to exploring further collaboration over the next 12 months or so as well. Before I kick off, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners from the land that we're meeting on. So for me, I'm joining from Canberra, the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, and the ongoing connection to land, culture, waters and country that they have in this area. I'll just share my screen, do a short presentation, and then very happy to answer questions and get into more of an open discussion after that. If people can't see that, someone let me know, but I think we'll kick off the presentation now. So firstly, for those who aren't familiar with ASFI, I'll give you a 101. Jo mentioned we were established around the same time as the Centre, very much with a similar kind of mission and ambition to work with institutions, from financial institutions, government, regulators, universities, right across the financial system, essentially to reshape the financial system in Australia and to work with international partners to do that effectively, knowing that capital is global, financial systems are global, but with a focus on Australia. So our purpose is very much about reshaping Australia's financial system to get more money into activities that will create a sustainable, resilient and inclusive Australia. And this came off the back of the development of the Australian Sustainable Roadmap, a similar process to what happened in New Zealand, where industry came together and put forward what needed to change in Australia's financial system to create the financial system that is fit for the future, that can both manage risks as well as capitalise and deliver opportunities. So the roadmap was developed over 2019 and 2020, 140 participants from 90 organisations, very much industry-led and driven, but with regulator support and some level of government input as well. And the roadmap really lays out a range of different recommendations to deliver on this vision. So as I mentioned, it's about both managing systemic risks and ensuring the financial system is resilient and stable in the long term, but also that it's able to meet the needs of the present as well as the long-term needs of all Australians, as well as the needs of the environment and economy. The idea of integrating within financial decisions sustainability considerations, both impacts, risks and opportunities, is really important. And there's parts of the roadmap that are very much focused on financial inclusion and ensuring that Australians, both individuals and businesses, have access to the type of financial products that can improve their well-being. And ultimately, mobilising capital, the large swathes of private capital that Jo mentioned in the introduction that are needed to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals and the net zero transition, and ultimately sort of a socially inclusive economy and society in Australia as well. There are 37 recommendations that cut across climate, environment and social impact as sort of thematic areas. And there are 4 key areas. So one is around embedding sustainability into leadership within financial institutions, embedding sustainability into practice, enabling resilience for Australians and building sustainable finance markets. And those recommendations are really focused from sort of the company right up to the industry, to the regulatory and to the whole system level in terms of where they're focused. ASFI was established off the back of delivery of the roadmap, really to continue that unprecedented collaboration that had happened during the roadmap development process, and to drive forward implementation of different parts of the roadmap, very much working in partnership with others who were already kind of doing a range of different activities towards some of the elements of the roadmap. And one of our key functions has really been to bring all of the activity in sustainable finance in Australia together and to start to build some stronger international partnerships to better connect what's happening in Australia. And as Jo mentioned, kind of a lot has happened more recently in the last sort of 12 to 18 months and taking that both globally and learning from what has happened in other international jurisdictions as well. So our members are across superannuation, investment management, banking, insurance and financial services. We started with 21 founding members, went out to 45 members, and really it's a broad cross-section right across financial institutions in terms of our memberships. We have an advisory committee, which is very much kind of part of our governance structure. They provide advice that includes regulators, government agencies, universities, other industry organisations, and they provide advice on sort of ASFI strategy and strong partners who we work with in terms of all of our work programs. There are a number of our work programs, and I can talk to these in a bit, but we do a lot of convening, collaborating, connecting across different parts of the finance system, and you'll see that reflected both in how we achieve our mission and the values and the way that we work. Our work program for 2023 has been under these 5 different pillars, and I'll kind of give you a broad overview of this to explain then where our capability work fits within this context. The first pillar of work has really been a main focus, particularly with the level of, I guess, policy reform happening with the Australian government at the moment. This is about enabling sustainable finance. So the sustainable finance strategy and working with government to both develop that and then move forward on implementation has been a key focus in the last 12 months. We've now moved into the development phase for the Australian Sustainable Finance Taxonomy. We've done quite a bit of work on the TNFD framework and bringing a financial institution perspective into some of the guidance that they're developing, as well as upskilling and supporting financial institutions in Australia to think about natural capital and get ready for nature-based financial reporting. And then there's also been a whole range of climate and other policy processes that we've been very much engaged in, and it's really pleasing to see the Australian government really taking a stronger focus and interest in the role of private capital in achieving policy objectives across that range of climate, environment and social impact areas. Finance sector leadership is the area of our work where the capability work fits in. And a lot of this is giving individuals and financial institutions the skills and capabilities that they need for the finance sector to continue to take a leadership role on sustainability issues, sort of at the national level, as well as with their clients and customers as well. So our summit fits under that pillar. We have a working group of our members, which looks at how organisations move from making commitments to implementing commitments, and then the work on capability very much fits within that as well. As I mentioned, we do a lot of connecting, coordinating, convening an annual progress report on the state of sustainable finance, which was released a couple of weeks ago, if people are interested in that. And over the course of 2023, have stood up our First Nations and Finance work program and our Sustainable Finance Solutions work program too. So to the issue of capability and why I guess we have bitten this off, 37 recommendations. There were many things that we could do. We've, over the last 2 years, very much focused on how we prioritise our effort based on the impact that is needed to achieve that step change progress against reshaping the financial system. And our progress tracker report, which we do annually, is a way of kind of measuring progress across the system against the roadmap recommendations, and also a way of uncovering sort of trends and signals in the system to inform how we best kind of spend our efforts and our sort of resources over the next 12 months as well. In the progress tracker in 2022, capability and skills amongst sustainable finance professionals and finance professionals more generally really came up as a constraint. So some work that UTS, the University of Technology Sydney, did in Australia, focusing specifically on climate skills, found that more than 3/4 of those professionals surveyed thought those skills were in moderate to high demand, and that demand is expected to intensify. So that research very much kind of backed in what we'd been hearing anecdotally in terms of conversations with members and conversations across the industry, that it's very hard to retain and to build the level of skills, particularly around climate, given the corporate sector generally with sustainability related reporting and climate related reporting in particular, but also increasingly thinking about the opportunities from the climate transition. These skills are in significant demand across the Australian system. The 2023 progress tracker also kind of continued to uncover that as a trend, and there was a much lower concentration of green talent within the finance sector in Australia than in other countries. And respondents, again, sort of we did surveys to inform this progress tracker report and some market analysis underpinning the strategy on capability that we have. And that indicated that the skills gap, not only is it significant, but it's also a significant impediment to progress. So given that, it seemed to be an area that ASFI very much kind of needed to look at and focus. The other factor, I guess, in informing why it was important for us to do is that while some very large organisations can solve the problem by developing kind of bespoke courses on their own, a lot of organisations said to us it doesn't make sense for everyone to be developing their own version of a Climate 101 or a Sustainable Finance Policy and Regulation 101 course. Ideally, you could have one course that meets the needs of a much broader range of professionals, whether they be working in a bank, in a super fund, an investment manager or an insurer. And so from sort of an efficiency and an effectiveness perspective, it makes sense to take an industry-wide approach to these challenges. So in terms of our strategy around capability on sustainable finance, there are a few areas that we identified that could really be pretty catalytic in unlocking capability right across the sector. Ultimately, so there's people who are working in finance and can learn sustainability and get the breadth and mix of skills that they need, but also people who are working outside of finance and may have really strong sustainability expertise, whether that be in climate, whether that be environment, biodiversity, and can learn finance. So something that we thought was very important is that it's both of those skills and the way that people can bring those together. It's not as important which part of the system people have sort of initially come from. So the first area of the work was very much as a standard setter and accreditor of both sustainable finance courses and then ultimately professionals. So to inform sort of this area of work, we very much looked across other professions and other things like accountants, lawyers, doctors, many very established professions as sort of a part of maturity of that profession. There is some kind of professional standards and some sort of industry-based accreditation to give employers and employees confidence in the skills and capabilities that someone is bringing into a role. The second area, and we did a lot of work mapping existing courses that whether that be sort of banking bodies or finance, international kind of finance institutes had developed around ESG and sustainable finance. And there's a fairly large uptake of those courses in the Australian market, and lots of feedback from those participants were it was great on sort of globally applicable technical content, but there wasn't an application in the Australian context, and many of them didn't also include the additional professional skills that you need to be successful in a sustainable finance role. So things like the ability to negotiate and influence, things like building kind of networks and contacts within the industry. These sort of online, quite technically based courses were fantastic for what they were able to deliver, but there were these other gaps in learning. So that led us to kind of say, well, are there things that in the way that ASFI does our work and in the work that we're doing that we can fill some of these gaps if others are not going to? And then the third one is this connector and convener function that we play in many of our work programs in bringing the different parts of, so whether that's FinSIA together with the CFA Institute, together with CANZ, so the accounting body, so that people know and understand what each other are doing and can collaborate on both course development as well as industry-wide standards and practices. So I'll just highlight a few different things under each of those pillars. The first one is this standard setter and accreditor role, and as I mentioned, there's both the accreditation of courses so that customers as well as financial institutions are able to differentiate between quality. Something that we heard a lot as we were sort of developing up this work program was because of this capability skills gap, there are many different course providers. Some of them are universities, others independent organisations, others sort of your more traditional kind of data providers or consultants who are developing course offerings to fill that gap. But it's very difficult for a people and culture manager or others who don't have technical capability, or even sort of people who are paying for these courses themselves, to differentiate between the quality of those courses. And then it's very difficult for employers to, I guess, understand if someone is coming to them saying, I've done these 3 courses, whether that's a 1-hour webinar or a 6-month micro-credential kind of very intensely assessed course done through a university. So it's very difficult to assess quality at the moment. Part of this is a maturity thing, and as I said, in other more developed professions, we've seen kind of more structure and rigour around this accreditation process for courses. So that was sort of why we've established the Sustainable Finance Capability Reference Group, very much to support ASFI to develop principles for the accreditation of courses. At the moment, that group has started with developing a capability and skills framework for sustainable finance in Australia, very much building on the work that others have done in Singapore and Ireland and other jurisdictions. But eventually, sort of by the middle of next year, that reference group will have an accreditation process and set of principles under which courses can be accredited. And linked to that is a certified sustainable finance professionals network. So at the moment, ASFI has institutional members and we work with financial institutions. Individuals are at the moment not our sort of structure. It doesn't necessarily cater well to individuals, but there's a large appetite and demand from individuals who are working in institutions that may not be ASFI members to get more involved in our work and to get better connected with others in the industry. And so this certified sustainable finance professionals network is very much intended to do that. The second pillar is around developing and providing course content. And I talked a little bit to the gaps that we had very strongly kind of heard from the market as we were developing up this capability pillar of work. I think there's, as I said, there's the sort of Australian target and understanding kind of Australian policy and regulation, and not just what has been publicly announced and what the timeframes for those, for example, climate disclosure reporting requirements, the timeframes for those coming in, but also what's coming and what people who want to get ahead of the curve should know about emerging trends. So it's both of those things. I think that's not currently there in the market. The other thing that people told us is that at the moment there's not a lot in between a university unit or sort of master's level micro-credential and a relatively sort of low cost, low time investment webinar or online module. And so it's difficult for people who don't want to invest in sort of a master's level course, but are still interested in building up different elements of their knowledge. So this modular approach was something that people were very keen to have in the market. The other thing that I mentioned already is this professional skills in addition to the technical knowledge, and there's a lot of the courses are focusing on technical knowledge at the moment. And the other real gap that we identified and have identified through a lot of our work with government is courses that are targeting the public sector. So as I'm sure you'll be very aware, kind of collaboration is very much at the heart of some of these shifts and objectives that we're trying to achieve around sustainable finance. And to do that well, you need both sort of a private and a public sector that understand these issues in a way that allows them to talk and collaborate and partner well. So this public sector side of capability is something else that we're also looking at. And then the next pillar is about sort of being the connector and convener. So one of the things that we've launched already is a mentoring program. Our first cohort kicked off in August, and that's a cohort of about 20 mentors and mentees to build connections and networks, and to start also using that as a mechanism to develop some of these professional skills and understandings as well. And then the other sort of connecting, convening function is a directory of sustainable finance courses. So in advance of the accreditation of courses, we will develop a directory that allows people to find courses that might align with their interests or their learning needs. The amount of kind of inbound inquiries we get about, oh, I'm new to this area, what should I do, what should I study, meant that, you know, doing this at a large scale that is readily shareable and can be valuable for the rest of the sector was something that we thought was definitely worth doing. So in terms of the timing of this work, as I mentioned, this has been something that we've been developing over the course of this year, but will really ramp up in the next 12 months or so. We've had one meeting of the capability reference group. As I said, at the moment, we're looking at this skills and capability matrix for sustainable finance professionals. And we're running the mentoring program as well. Development of course materials will likely start early in the new year, and then some of those other things going through the course of the next 12 months as well. And applicability for New Zealand. So I wanted to look at this both from the lens of an individual practitioner as well as those who are responsible for capability uplift across your organisations. And I think there's applicability of some of this work depending for both of those roles and functions, or from both of those perspectives. I think the course directory will be equally valuable. At the moment, we're doing the courses that are Australian based, but given many of those are now delivered online, as well as sort of the strong interconnections between Australia and New Zealand financial systems, the expectation is that many of those courses will be valuable if you're a New Zealand-based organisation as well. The competency framework as well, I think there's value both from an individual practitioner as well as organisations. Many large financial institutions in Australia are developing their own competency frameworks at the moment to look at the skills and capabilities that they need across different roles and functions on sustainability. This will be, I guess, at a slightly higher level, given it'll be industry-wide and apply across banking, insurance, superannuation, investment management, but will give organisations a good place to start, and then support L&D planners within organisations think about and make decisions about the type of capability offerings that they offer to their staff and to different staff in different functions as well. The professional network that we're setting up, again, this will be Australian focused but not exclusively, so if others want to join that, that there's sort of more than welcome to join. I guess, again, given that Australia and New Zealand often operate as one pool in terms of recruitment in the finance sector and sustainable finance in particular, that might be something of interest to people in New Zealand as well. And then the course offerings, in terms of developing course offerings, there'll definitely be a course focusing on Australian policy and regulation. Again, given the close collaboration and things like the climate and Treasurer's 2+2 commitments to collaborate closely on sustainable finance, I would suggest that that would also be useful and valuable for New Zealand-based organisations, particularly given many parent companies are Australian organisations as well. And then finally, the accreditation process would really, we're expecting that to be used by the market as a marker of quality of courses, and then also the principles that we're developing for that accreditation could very much be used and applied in other jurisdictions. I'm expecting those to be things like, does the course content cover off on a capability or skill that's been identified in the competency framework for the industry? Is there a rigorous kind of assessment process to ensure that learning outcomes have been achieved? Those types of high-level principles. So I see them as being applicable in other jurisdictions as well. So very happy to open for questions. I'll stop sharing my screen and welcome you back, Joe. If there's anything you want to ask or anything anyone else has put in the chat.
Thanks, Kristy. Very great overview, and thank you for being comprehensive in that. I will just open it up. Anyone in the chat, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in there. But in the meantime, perhaps I'll just sort of get some momentum going. So you talked in your, oh, David White, there we go. Hi, David White. You've got your hand up, David. Let's see what we do with that. David, are you able to pop your question in the chat?
I have allowed mic and camera.
Great. David?
David, if you can just unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, David, I'll give you a minute to do that. In the meantime, Kristy, tell us about when you did your initial scan of the market and you said that you found a green talent gap. Is there anything that you're able to share in terms of kind of understanding that gap and where you may have looked as a kind of comparison exercise with Australia?
So a lot of that was based on the research that UTS did, and we highlighted in the progress tracker. They did a pretty comprehensive survey in terms of, I can't remember how many respondents they got, but they got from right across finance, so banking, super, investment management. I think the work in this year's progress tracker that we highlighted was based on some research that LinkedIn had done in terms of the comparators to other jurisdictions. So I would need to go back to the source to talk in more detail, but I think that will be, that's referenced in our progress tracker if people want to find out more. But I think there are some jurisdictions like London, like Singapore, where government and the finance sector has very deliberately kind of taken a lot of measures and done a lot to position those cities as green financial centres, and that includes work to uplift capability as well as a whole lot of, in the Singaporean case, grant funding to different types of organisations to support, research and capacity as well as the development of courses. And MAS in Singapore has been very active in terms of its work and thinking around capability. So I think those jurisdictions I would expect would have done a lot better than places like Australia, where it's fairly organically been developed off the back of industry needs and responding to global developments rather than being a concerted kind of effort between government and industry. We're hoping that will change with the sustainable finance strategy that got released for consultation just last week. So I think Australia is very keen to catch up to other jurisdictions, and capability will be a pretty fundamental enabler of us to kind of catch up as an industry and as a government.
Right, thank you. And do you see, or does your steering group foresee that there will be a material difference in the capability programming required to support greater capability in the public sector versus the private?
Yes. So there's some fundamental differences in that most public sector entities, things like climate-related disclosures will phase in over time for public sector entities. There's also probably stronger capability on the or simpler operations for public sector entities than for many private sector entities, but it's the other side of the coin. So having public sector entities understand not necessarily the sustainability issues, but the private capital perspective on those issues and how you partner in structure through like blended finance to achieve kind of goals of mobilising capital towards those policy objectives. So it's similar issues, just a very different perspective on the public sector side.
Thanks, Kristy. A couple of questions here from Sebastian. So the first part being, can you share which universities you're working with on this program of work, and then who is in the capability reference group? Is there a leaning towards finance professionals or sustainability professionals and experts?
So in terms of the universities, we've got UTS and UNSW have been the most actively engaged in this work. We're also working with the Uni of Melbourne, who've just established a Sustainable Finance Centre, but they're not as directly involved in their capability work. The reference group, the list of people is on our website, and it's very much a mix. So it's probably a third from the academic sector, so from universities, a third from other industry organisations like CANZ, CFA Society, those organisations that have developed similar kind of accreditation as well as industry-wide learning and development programs, and a third from different types of financial institutions. So there's an accounting firm representative, there's a couple of banks, there's some super funds, some investment managers. So it's a real mix, and the intention is to get sort of a range of different perspectives in that capability reference group.
Great, thank you. Now, a question from Lydia. Can you say a bit more about the professional skills side of things? What have you learned the gaps or capabilities needed are?
Oh, this is one of my favourite topics, because I think when people talk about capability, they immediately kind of think technical understanding of reporting, for example. And that's, like, don't get me wrong, that's absolutely critical. But people often forget the other side, like how you think in a way that takes into account the rest of the system. And if your objective as a sustainable finance professional is to not just allocate capital to those businesses that you're going to tag as sustainable finance, but to think about how you can increase that over time and how you can integrate within all of your organisation's decision making some of those sustainability considerations on the risk and opportunity side, then what you're thinking about is how you're changing a system. And systems thinking is an area that some people kind of use and adopt, but is not a common way of thinking, I don't think, in many of the organisations that we talk to and we work with. There's absolutely pockets of it, but some of those types of, I guess, mindsets and approaches, and I would call them capabilities rather than technical skills, have been very much kind of coming up through the work as some of the professional skills gaps, as well as things like negotiating and influencing, because very oftentimes the sustainable finance team or the responsible investment team doesn't have ultimate decision making sort of authority over investment decisions, for example, but is trying to influence the rest of the investment team. And so it's some of those skills and approaches to get outcomes when it's not a kind of direct command and control reporting line that people have found very valuable and are keen to get more of, I guess, in this context.
Great, thank you. And David White's made a comment here, broad principles notwithstanding, for accreditation to be relevant in New Zealand, any course ascribing capability would need to be New Zealandized. And that's much broader, obviously, than just thinking about our Indigenous peoples. But if we go there for a moment and we talk about the Australian context and the different types of sort of adaptive responses and capabilities that need to be developed to change the system, can you share any thinking that ASFI's done around sort of cultural capability and sort of broader incorporation of First Nations perspectives into this work?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, something that ASFI has focused on quite a lot over the course of this year, both internally, and we're developing our reconciliation action plan at the moment, but also as shaping up our First Nations and finance work program that we've had incredible privilege of working with Beck Blurton, who's a Noongar woman, to develop up. And that's really, there's multiple parts to that program, but a really important one is how do we bring First Nations perspectives, expertise, and amplify First Nations voices through all of the work that we're doing. And that includes sort of the taxonomy work and voice and perspectives in the governance structure for that, the taxonomy technical expert group, the advisory groups, and how we think about codifying free, prior and informed consent in the minimum social safeguards part of the taxonomy, how through events like our summit we use that to build cultural capability right across the finance sector for people who may not necessarily have access or in their day jobs have the opportunity to hear from different First Nations perspectives on a range of issues that they work on day to day. So I guess there's a range of ways that we're looking to learn from and amplify and elevate those perspectives through all our work. On the capability work, we're very early on in the piece, and so still thinking through how we do that, and likely that will come through our First Nations and Finance work program as well.
Thanks, Kristy. A couple of questions from Bridget Coates, our chair. We're very pleased to have on the call. Hi, Bridget. The first one is whether you're sort of well positioned to take a view on which have been the more successful or useful courses that are available in the Australian market to date. And then the second part of the question is whether you've developed capability programs around leadership in sustainable finance.
Great questions. I think there's a range of different both online and kind of in-person courses that universities are running in Australia at the moment. We haven't done all of the courses. This is sort of part of the directories to start to pull them all together, and then the accreditation principles is to start to assess quality. So a lot of people in the Australian market have done both the CFA ESG course, which is the investment manager kind of focused ESG course, and then on the banking side, the FinSIA is doing the certified green banking course. Both of those are online, and both of those are fairly technically focused, but they have kind of been developed globally, and so have a good global view of where these issues are heading and the type of the type of modelling and kind of integration of risk as well as identification of opportunities that are most appropriate for those different parts of the sector. Yeah, I think it's probably, it also depends on where students are in terms of introduction to sustainability, or if they're already working in the field and want to dive into, for example, target setting in a particular sector. So again, this kind of modular approach idea so that people can get a good sense of the type of thing that they need at that point and then dive in, I think will be helpful. The second part of the question, can you just remind me, Joe, what the second question was? Leadership in sustainable finance. This, again, is one of my favourite areas, and something, so the leadership working group, I guess, has been working with a group of members who are interested and in exploring different issues related to taking a leadership role on sustainability from a financial institution perspective. I'm very keen, and we've been sort of having a number of conversations with different partners about developing a deeper, more in-depth kind of program that could be available to a broader cohort of people around leadership and sustainable finance. But it's been something that to date has, we've just had to kind of progress very slowly given other priorities, but very keen to jump into that in the new year.
Do you have any insights, Kristy, that you can share from your initial cohort of mentor and mentees, or is that sort of too early to say?
They've literally just been matched. So in the last couple of days, they've just found their matches. So we had an in-person mixer event where we got all the mentors and mentees in place and did sort of a speed dating for mentor-mentee relationships the day after our summit. Even from that, the feedback was really positive. A lot of people met people that they otherwise wouldn't come across or wouldn't kind of cross paths with. So we had, from banking, investment, insurance, and financial services. So that's that kind of structured networking, particularly for the mentees. People found a great way to access, even in short sort of 15-minute conversations, expertise and experience that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. But no, they're sort of formally kicking off their sessions in the next month or so.
Great. So I've got a question here from Sebastian. I'm just going to reframe the question. In its original form, it was, what is, in your view, the impact of sustainable finance to date? So perhaps we'll make that a little easier for you to answer. And we'll ask, in terms of the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve with your capability work, can you give us a sense of, at a high level or even at a more granular one, if you can, what are the outcomes that you're really pushing for over the next 12 to 18 months?
So essentially, and this goes back to why we're focused on capability. Why is capability one of the many things that we could do? Why are we focusing on this? And it's because it can either enable or hinder progress on the shifts in the financial system for sustainability. So if people within organisations don't understand the issues, or if they do understand the issues but don't know what to do with the information that they're getting on particular risks, or they don't understand how to change, for example, a credit assessment process so that it more accurately integrates information on natural capital on a farm, so that farmers are incentivised and rewarded for farming practices that actually grow and build natural capital and therefore their resilience and productivity over time. If people don't both know that information but know what to do with that information and know how to shift the system from wherever they sit within the system, we're not going to achieve our objectives as ASFI. So in terms of the outcomes that we want to achieve, we want a much larger proportion of the finance sector to have the knowledge and skills that they need to act and change and make the shifts within their roles. And we want them to have, I guess, the confidence and the capability, the networks and that supportive environment around them to be able to do all of those things as well. So it's fairly high level, but...
Great, thank you. Question from Michael Green. Is there any work on clarification and definition of terminology in regards to market claims integrity of financial products?
That sounds like a Dorothy Dixer on the taxonomy. But I think, Michael, what you're asking is, definitions or claims are being made about sustainability credentials of both kind of consumer products as well as financial products without reference to a common set of standards and definitions. And this is exactly what our work on the Australian Sustainable Finance Taxonomy is trying to bring, some credibility and rigour to the way not just financial institutions but also corporates and others talk about the sustainability attributes of their assets, activities, products or business generally. So taxonomy is a terrible word, but just a complicated word for saying a set of definitions about what is sustainable, and in the Australian case, what is contributing towards a net zero 2050 transition. So this idea of having credibility and consistency so that financial institutions as well as others can compare in a like-for-like way whether assets or financial products or company transition plans essentially are supporting the sustainability objectives that someone cares about and wants to allocate their capital in line with, is really important, and has been in many jurisdictions used as sort of a fundamental building block of sustainable finance policy and regulation. And the Australian government is very keen to do the same. So there's the disclosures which look at the risk side, starting with climate and then building out to other sustainability issues over time, and then taxonomy, which looks at how you differentiate the sustainability attributes of companies, assets, activities, and similarly starting with climate mitigation and moving out to other objectives is the intention over time.
And Kristy, is it likely that your capability programming or efforts will have a specific focus on capability with respect to taxonomies, given that's such a big focus of ASFI's work to date?
Yeah, and again, kind of for the effective implementation of a taxonomy, there will need to be a capability uplift for people to understand how to use it. I guess one of the other reasons that taxonomies are developed is so that you don't have to have the very detailed level of technical capability on every issue for every sector within financial institutions. And so I guess the other linkages, but you use all of that information in developing the taxonomy criteria, but that's done kind of by the development team, not needing to be done on a case-by-case basis every time you're looking at a new investment or kind of financing opportunity. So in some sense, there will need to be a capability uplift so that people can understand how to use and apply a taxonomy. But and one of the purposes of the taxonomy is so that you don't have to have hugely deep pools of technical knowledge on every issue within every institution as well. So there's a capability link there as well.
Thanks, Kristy. Just one more question from me. Can you tell us a little bit about how you work with the kind of ecosystem partners, so RIA and other organisations that do the capability building piece as well, and your sort of approach to determining when it's your role to sort of step in and build something or develop something versus a business problem to solve or something that should be taken forward by an individual institution?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because in a similar vein to the way that the centre works, collaboration is very much at the core of how we work and working in partnership with others, because ideally we only step in if no other organisation kind of wants to take and own particular issues. On capability, we've in the Australian market, RIA is looking at capability for financial advisor cohort, which is very much complementary to the work that we're doing, which is more sort of the institutional end of finance. IGCC does capability uplift in the member working groups that they do in terms of helping people to understand and use investor tools and frameworks and things. But they're definitely, no other organisation is focusing on this leadership capability aspect. And I think the other kind of unique view that ASFI plays is this whole of system view. So how do you bring government into this capability? How do you work with other industry organisations? So I mentioned CANZ and CFA Institute and some of these other organisations who have large membership networks and are, on, for example, disclosures and capability around disclosures. CANZ has been doing a lot of work to uplift their very large membership base already. So absolutely kind of support and contribute where that is valuable from their perspective, but that's an area that we don't need to fill a gap in. So very intentionally kind of encouraging others and encouraging really broad and distributed ownership of the capability challenge as well. What we often play, and this is sort of the connecting convening function, is a little bit like a coordination function between all those areas, because as you very well know, there's a lot happening in this space. People don't often necessarily know what other organisations are doing. So having this whole of system view allows us to connect the dots where that makes sense, but also then allows us to identify gaps, encourage others to fill those gaps where that makes most sense. And if no one else will step in, then we will look at whether that's something that we can do.
Great. Final question, Kristy, and then I'll ask you to give us a little bit of instruction about how we contact ASFI if we'd like to know more on a case-by-case basis. Can you just, for those who aren't aware, earlier this week, last week, the Australian Treasury released its initial draft sustainable finance strategy for Australia. Kristy, any thoughts or comments on that you'd like to leave with the group around the effects that you think that will have on sustainable finance in Australia and the role that ASFI has played and looks to play in future in terms of that relationship with government?
Yeah, so it was a very positive development. I think industry had been calling for government to develop and put forward a sustainable finance strategy that both laid out to the market a reform agenda in this area, but also put Australia back in the game globally on sustainable finance. I think the roadmap and that development process was industry-led because there wasn't government leadership on these issues, and so it was very much welcomed when the Treasurer made the announcement last December that government would develop a sustainable finance strategy, and ASFI and others have been working very closely with Treasury to ensure that that has the level of ambition, the broad coverage in terms of climate focus, but expanding to other sustainability issues over time, and also takes sort of a ambitious view of Australia's place in the world and our ability to shape global rules and norms on things like transition finance that matter a lot to us and matter a lot to the world's ability to get capital to support transition in our region in particular. So overall very positive. There are some parts of it I think that already are starting to be implemented. So that was, I guess, the other positive thing, that it was government has taken a pretty iterative approach to both developing the strategy at the same time as moving ahead with implementation on things like the climate-related disclosures regime that will come into force in the middle of next year, development of the taxonomy that we've been working with government on, and the green bonds program, which has also sort of started development. So there was a range of those types of issues that were kind of included in the strategy, but implementation's already started. There was also a range of other things that government will look at in more detail over the next 12 months as well. So things like data, things like regulator mandates and alignment of financial sector regulation with sustainability objectives, areas like product stewardship, and then product labelling are issues that government has kind of committed to looking in more detail at what role they might play in those. So yeah, all in all, really positive development. The hard work kind of comes as we get to implementation, and that will happen over the course of the next 12 to 18 months.
Thanks, Kristy. Remind us again, if individuals would like to learn more about ASFI's capability work or any other part of your program of work, how best to connect?
So very welcome to get in touch by email. Unfortunately, Natalie, who leads our capability works, on holiday this week, so she wasn't able to join as well. But if the best email is info, so info @asfi.org.au. and then we can direct that to the right part of the team. And as I said, we're sort of stepping up in terms of resourcing and ability to focus on the capability work program from the beginning of next year. So that will be very exciting. Looking forward to kind of continuing the collaboration with you, Jo, and others at the centre. Great.
Thanks, Kristy. Thanks everyone for your time today. As Kristy said, the centre is, the centre and ASFI are in close communication on a number of matters, and capabilities very much on the horizon for us. We're conscious that in the New Zealand market, there's been a lot of focus on disclosures and quite a bit of focus on TNFD as well. And so we're just sort of exploring, I suppose, as I said at the beginning of this call, the right pathway for trans-Tasman alignment and how we lean in to the work that ASFI is doing and look for opportunities to apply it here. Thanks, Kristy. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much for having me. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Ka kite.